Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is going to be another Raid Shadow Legends video. I am back in the Sand Devil Necropolis, and I have to say, as much as this dungeon is kind of annoying, as much as I'm not a huge fan of the oils and the ascension of the gear, I have to say I'm having a really fun time kind of speed tuning with it and playing with it and trying to find different ways to go about it. It's not, the greatest of dungeons and stuff, but there's only a few areas in this game where speed tuning is something you can really do mathematically and like really precisely. This is one of them. And so that's kind of, I think, one of the things that I'm enjoying about it. I would not be surprised if most of you cannot stand this stuff, but I understand that, right? It's a very difficult dungeon. It is one of the highest end game level portions of this game at the moment. But I still feel like there is some interesting things we can learn about it. And as any parts of this game, when you're learning about one area, it actually informs you of how to proceed in other areas, which I think is kind of cool. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about that Sand Devil Necropolis. First, I want to talk a little bit about what we should be farming and how to go about doing that. And then I want to talk about some different solo farm builds. And the reason why I bring this up is I just released not very long ago, I'm not sure when this video is going up, but some point previous to this, I've released a Tyrant video talking about solo farming on stage, I think 11 it was, and showing how that's a very attainable thing. And in that video, I talked a lot about how that's not the only champion, that not by far. There's a ton of champions that can actually solo this dungeon at the early levels. And so today what I want to do is I'm going to actually showcase a few different approaches, because I'd asked in the video to share some of the farming tips that other people were already using, that you viewers were using, and I got a lot of interesting comments and pointed out a few different interesting champions, and it got me thinking about some different options. And so I decided to build a few, test them out, and I figured I could showcase them to you guys to give you an idea that there is really a pretty wide breadth of champions that we can bring to this. But I'm going to cover one, the speeds you're going to want to kind of keep those champions to, because they might not be as fast as you think they need to be. And two, the types of champions that you want to bring in. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about how you're going to want to build them to make sure that you can survive this dungeon effectively. So that's the goal for today. I'm kind of excited about it. I think it's going to be a little fun video. Hopefully it's not too long, but we're going to be talking about a few different things. So let's start in by talking about the levels we should be farming for this, and why we only want to farm the certain levels and what we're looking to get out of this dungeon. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one that comes out. And of course, if you enjoyed today's music, we have that link down below in the pinned comment and description of this video, and you can use code DeadwoodJedi, save yourself 15%. And of course, if you want some account work, you don't like doing the work yourself, I'm more than happy to do it for you. My team is at the beck and call. Just visit my website, deadwoodjedi.com. So when it comes to the Sand Devil Necropolis, this dungeon is obviously very difficult, and many of the videos that you're seeing out there are focusing on stages 24 and 25, and there's good reason for that. If you can farm those stages, it's the most efficient way to get the oils you need to ascend your gear. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no two ways about it. It's the best drop rates for the greater oils. I can't remember the name of all of them, but the top oil, the middle oil, and the bottom oil, right? All three of them. You're going to get enough of those in those dungeons where that's all you need to farm. And thankfully, those drop in a proportionate rate, so that really becomes all you need to farm, right? And if you're farming 24, 25, you're going to get enough of the lesser oils and the middle oils and the greater oils to be able to ascend all of your gear. You don't need to farm any other stages. And so that's a good thing for us. But I think most of us, and this might actually include myself, I'm really still not 100% sure where I want to farm on this dungeon, or even if I want to farm it or how much. Because one, we have to keep in mind that it's not necessary for any of the content that currently exists in this game, because we've beaten all the content currently in this game. So we don't need to ascend our gear in order to get that done. It's not necessary, but it can be very helpful, right? We're again just talking about bonus stats on our gear. That's a great thing, right? Now, obviously, if you're a high-level arena player, the competitive aspect of it, well, we just push the bar a little bit higher, and now you have to farm it if you want to stay at the top levels of things. But that's a very small portion of the player base. So for most of us, this doesn't hurt us. It's going to actually help us help our builds, help our gearing and make it a little bit easier to do the content that we already have in the game. That doesn't mean it's good. Still have to spend the energy for it, still have to get all that stuff. And so I can understand why people are very upset with the dungeon and don't like it a lot. That actually makes a lot of sense to me. But since we do have it and it's not going anywhere, we should recognize that ascending your gear is only going to help make the existing content easier. No ifs, ands, or buts. And this is actually a really nice thing for people at low levels of this game or in the mid game, which is probably where you are if you're actually going to be farming this dungeon. It's probably somewhere in the mid game. You do need enough gear and enough proper champions to be able to farm this dungeon efficiently. And that's not for everybody, right? That's not going to be something that's going to be for a low-level player, right? You're going to need to have a little bit more going on if you're going to want to make that happen. So it's not the easiest thing in the world, to be sure. But I think it can still be incredibly, incredibly valuable to do it. But if we're not farming stage 24 or 25, what stages are we farming? Well, I think actually the one that makes the most sense, really, regardless of what level you're at in this game, if you're not farming those two, is just to farm stage 7. And that might seem a little counterintuitive, right? Like I was showed a solo farming build for stage 11, right? And I know people are farming even higher than that, stages 14, 15, 16, anywhere in there. People are farming those stages and doing so effectively. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think stage 7 is a place where you want to farm if you're not doing 24 and 25. And let me explain why. Obviously, you want to, ascend all your gear. You need the oils for that. Stage 7 gives you those lesser oils, and it's the most efficient way to get just the lesser oils as far as energy versus, rewards go. At the higher levels, you do start to get some of like the middle level oil, right? So you can ascend your gear a little bit higher with that. And that's a good reason to farm those higher stages like 15, 16, something like that. But I think there's going to be an outsized need for the lesser oil compared to any of the other ones. And the reason is simple. You're not always going to get the ascension that you want. And you have a ton of gear that you're going to want to give it at least one roll just to see what the bonus attribute is going to be. Because sometimes you're not going to need it, right? If I'm, leveling up an attack, let's say I'm leveling up an accuracy chess piece. Well, I don't need an attack bonus on it. I don't need a defense bonus on it, right? I need more accuracy. Maybe I want resistance. Maybe defense or HP would be good in the survive kind of build, but not every bonus stat is going to be helpful. And if you get flat anything, that's obviously going to be less desirable than getting the percentage bonus. So there's always going to be a little bit of like, let me test this piece. Does this work with what I have? Yes, no, maybe so. And if it's no, well, then there's no point rolling it any further, right? At least not ascending it any further. The piece may still be good. Again, it's just bonus stats, so the piece isn't any worse than it was before, but it's not going to be that endgame piece maybe, or that legendary, amazing piece that's going to make and break your build. So you probably only want to ascend it just once with that lesser oil. So that's one of those things is you want to see, is it good or not? So you just using the lesser oils, super valuable in that sense. And that's why I think just farming stage 7 can be extremely useful, because you're going to get only the lesser oil, which is all we need right now. All we want to do is ascend those few pieces that we have and see, is this worth continuing to build up or not? And if it's not, well, okay, there it is. But, at least we can test it early on without having to waste a lot of energy and time getting these higher level the oils that we don't really need right off the bat. And so obviously 24 and 25 is going to be better, but if you can't, stage 7, I think, is going to be the place to farm. Now, obviously, I'm going to be showing some farm builds right now, and these champs I did build out well. I wanted to make sure they worked, and it's always nice to showcase a very successful build for you guys as opposed to something that's just barely eking along. But I don't know that these are going to be the minimum stats required. These are just the stats that I had on my own account that would work for this. So I'm sure you can probably get away with something a little bit less. There's always ways to kind of, tweak what you need depending to get through certain parts of this game. So it's not, don't feel like, there's only one way to do it. You only have to build them like I have it built here. That's not going to be the case. And definitely there are multiple sets out there now that can make this kind of stuff a little bit easier to get by too. And so there's definitely a lot of ways to manipulate it in order to survive a little bit better. But let's talk about some of the champions I'm using here and, different ways I'm going about doing it. And we can talk a little bit about speeds as well, because I think it's very applicable to actually speed tune your team for this, even on these lower stages, especially if you're solo farming. Now, the essence of having a solo farmer has to be having some kind of damage ability in addition to having some kind of healing ability. Now, there's many of these champions that you can actually get away without having a healing skill, right? If you build your champions in regen set and use something like immortal set, maybe even a defined set, you can get away without having to have any natural healing within the kit. One of the reasons why I like using Tyrant or champions like him is he does have a natural healing ability when there's HP burn being placed out there. It also gives a nice damage mitigation naturally when HP burn is on the enemy. So using somebody like him is a great choice to be able to use. There's plenty of champions that can do that type of thing, but not all of them are going to be suitable for this. So that's one of the reasons why I used Tyrant in that video I did. However, as long as I bring in champions that bring some kind of damage ability and I put them in regen set, they should be able to get through at least they should be able to survive for quite a while. The more damage they do, if the fight doesn't go super long, then they can get away without having to worry about it at all, right? You won't ever have a problem. If they don't do enough damage, if the fight goes too long, eventually that max HP will probably beat them down beyond the amount of healing that you can get out of regen set. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is regen set heals you every time you take a turn. So the more turns you take, the more healing you're going to get, the more that max HP you're going to be able to erase, and thus the longer you're going to be able to survive. So that's another reason why I say there is a little bit of speed tuning that I do encourage for this dungeon, because I think it will help. And I have a variety of champions that are going to be doing this. Now, the other thing, of course, is if you have somebody that just brings in natural healing, that can be massive for you. Then you don't have to worry about things like regen set. It can help, it won't hurt, but you don't necessarily need to worry about that because they're bringing in their own healing. So you can bring in damage mitigation gear. Stuff like Stalwart or Defiant sets are going to be really, really nice. Or you just build up the stats you need. Like one of the things that I'm finding really important is bringing in resistance, right? Those slow debuffs that the boss can place on you can be a real pain in the butt and real problematic to deal with, especially as far as trying to keep enough turns or speed tune your team. So that's definitely something where if you can do that, I think that would be a recommended approach, right? And I think a good way to go about doing it. So a couple things you'll notice on these champions. They all have a lot of HP, obviously. We're getting the max reduced. We still need to survive. So getting a lot of HP is really good. They're all going to be fairly fast, right? There's a couple different ways you can go about this. One is not a super fast approach, and one is a very fast approach, and it's going to depend on the amount of healing that you can bring in for your champions, and the cooldowns that those champions are going under. Those are the two things that are going to be huge factors for this. The other thing that they're all going to be bringing in is some kind of passive damage, right? So some of them, I'm going to show you Mashald, who's going to bring in raw damage. I'm going to show you, what's his name? Walking Tomb Drang, unbooked, unmastered, who's going to be doing passive damage with his HP burn. I'm going to show you Urogram, who's going to do passive damage with his poisons. And I'm going to bring in Cephalia, who can also do passive damage with the HP burn. These are all champions that can solo this boss, and, to varying degrees of success, to very different speeds, but they all have that ability to do it. So these are all some options for you out there. And so let's go ahead and we'll start looking at them. So one of my viewers commented that Mashald can solo this, and he's actually spectacular for this for obvious reasons. He gives himself a ton of continuous heals, and that can help erase that max HP drastically. You do have to build him tanky enough to survive, but that's not an incredibly hard thing to do, especially with sets like Defiant and Stalwart out there. You do want some accuracy on him. That is something that you're going to want, but because he gives himself that increased speed buff, and because he takes that extra turn in his kit, you don't actually need any resistance on him. It doesn't matter if he gets debuffed. Now, it will be important to make sure that you're faster than the boss, and that's going to be helpful to get through this. In fact, I think that you could probably make him as fast as you want. The faster is only going to be better because it's going to mean more turns, more damage, and we're just relying on him doing raw damage, and because he's such a strong damage-dealing champion, anyway, he's really effective, especially at this low stage where I'm able to farm this in under 2 minutes or so, which is a pretty good number, I would say, to be able to get through it. So Mashald is one of those perfect champions for this. Increased speed, he gives himself continuous heal, and he deals good damage. That's the perfect system of the champion that we would want to bring in to be able to solo this. Another perfect champion for this to be able to solo is Cephalia. Now, she's not going to be as fast because her HP burn on her A1 skill is not nearly as reliable as it would be for many of these champions out here. But she's got a perfect kit for this. She places a block debuff on herself. She gives herself a massive heal solo, and it's on a 2-turn cooldown, which means that to be able to utilize her, all you have to really do is prioritize that A2 and have her go to town. That's all you really need to make it work. You don't need any special sets to do it as long as she's tanky enough to survive. So things like Stalwart and Defiant can be really helpful. You do need enough accuracy to land the debuff, but you don't have to worry about resistance, which is a really nice thing not to have to worry about because it's hard to build everything on these champions. Now, one of the things I do want to talk about a little bit is speeds, because obviously different speeds are going to give you different ratios as far as how you move. And on stage 7, there are some specific speed ratios that I would really recommend you go to in order to stay in sync with the boss. Now, like I said, Cephalia has a 2-turn cooldown on her heal. All we're using is that A2, the heal, and her A1 with the HP burn. I turn off her A3 ability. And because of that, we can actually really speed tune her to be very, very effective, where she gives herself basically a double heal when the boss is asleep, and it'll work really nicely. Now, one of the things to recognize with the boss, he does have a 2-turn sleep after his big wipe ability, right? So that 2-turn sleep skill of his means that because he's got 4 turns, basically 4 other skills that go, is basically that he's going to be on a 6-turn cooldown, right? He does the wipe, he sleeps for 2 turns, he does the second big hit, right, where he heals himself up, and then he has 2 baby hits that put the decreased speed and the decreased accuracy on you. That's 6. That's 6. I counted them out. It's 6 overall. So if you can make sure that your skills are in sync with that, if you have champions that have 3-turn cooldowns on their skills, that means they'll go through all their skills twice every time the boss goes through their cycle of abilities. That can be really good. So you can time out when you're getting your healing to make sure he's asleep and you reduce that max HP. You can time out when you're getting your debuffs so you make sure you get the HP burn or whatever you need on. Well, Cephalia, like I said, 2-turn cooldown on that A2 ability. Well, that does work within a 6-turn cooldown, but I would love to get multiple turns for her. So one of the things we can do, if you want to stay within a 1-1 ratio of the boss, he takes a turn, you take a turn, you really just need to be slower than him, right? And the boss speed at stage 7 is like 180 speed. So you basically want to be 179 speed all the way down to about 160 in that range, and you should maintain a 1-1 ratio, assuming you don't get speed debuffed, right? You don't want that slow debuff. That is important. But even if you get that, it shouldn't be a huge enough factor to throw you off completely. It can affect things, so I do, recommend building your resistance so you can resist it, but it shouldn't completely derail your run, even if you do get that. However, if you want to go faster, so you have somebody on a 4-turn cooldown, and you want to be able to utilize all those skills twice, you can do that by making sure that your champions go 240 speed or faster. 240 or faster. There's not really a low level, there's not like a cap on that. You can go really, really fast and you still stay at that 4-turn ratio. And what that does for you, I think this is really important. What that does by going on a 4-turn ratio is you're going to basically get a double turn once when the boss is asleep. And that can be really helpful because now all of a sudden we're getting at least 3 attacks during the boss's turn, sleeping turns, at least 3 turns, I should say, while the boss is asleep. It gives us more chances to land debuffs, more chances to heal. It can be really beneficial. And when we're relying on stuff like regen gear, more turns makes it a lot easier for us to heal just from the gear, and that can be huge for us. Now, obviously, Cephalia, like I said, is going to be really good in that situation because that heals on a 2-turn cooldown. So I don't need her in regen because she's going to be able to heal herself twice while the boss is taking those turns. I open with the A1, allow the boss to hit first, and then when he's asleep, we heal, we HP burn, we heal, and then the boss wakes up. And it's a perfect balance. We do take another double turn later on, partway through the run, after like one of the A1 skills of the boss, but that doesn't hurt us, right? It's still just more turns. It just puts us in sync after that wipe ability comes through and he's asleep for us to take him down, and that's a massive ability. So Cephalia is, I think, a really good choice if you have her. She's not a champion that gets used a ton in this game, so you know, being able to bring somebody like that out of your vault and be effective with her can be really nice. Another champion I want to point out, and I think this is probably the best option, let me rephrase that. The most accessible option, at least that I've found so far, and I haven't looked super deeply, but one of the champions I really love for this is Urogram. Now, Urogram is great because he gives himself continuous heal, he has natural healing in his kit, and he does a lot of passive damage with the poisons. And so being able to utilize him is really good. Now, his skills are on 4-turn cooldown, so if you're going to want to use him, again, I do recommend going 240 speed or faster. He's also going to be a little harder to build because you need accuracy, you need resistance because he doesn't, you know, prevent the debuffs from landing on him. Even if he does have a cleanse, it's not consistent enough, I would say, to really be 100%. Also, his cleanse skill, I would actually recommend turning it off. I don't think you need it because he gives himself a continuous heal buff and he gives yourself a little bit natural healing anyway. You don't actually need regen gear on him for him to be effective. It doesn't hurt. And in fact, I would say it definitely helps, but you don't necessarily need it. So you don't need the crazy god tier regen gear in order to utilize him. But if you build him with enough resistance, enough accuracy, obviously, to land his debuffs, and enough HP to survive, he can be a really solid option for you. It's not a fast run, but it is effective. And, you know, just being able to solo it, that means you can bring in food. If you're farming overnight, you don't really have to worry too much about the time it's taking, but it's definitely one of the slower approaches. But as an epic champion, even if he is a void epic, he is probably more attainable than many of these legendaries, and so he becomes an option that people might be able to use. And if you can use Urogram, I know there are other champions out there that can be utilized similar to him that might be a good alternative option. The last champion I want to bring out here is going to be Walking Tomb Drang, and I think one of my favorite champions, obviously, just in the game. He's incredible. Anytime you can have a unresistible, you know, HP burn, that's a great thing. But he also does a natural thing where he will, you know, activate his own HP burn with his A1. It makes for a really nice combination, especially against this boss. Now, he's a little bit interesting. His A3 is not a heal ability. It's an HP equalizing, so it doesn't erase any max HP. So if you're going to use somebody like him, you absolutely 100% need, you know, regen gear. I do know people have been using lifesteal to some effect as well on this dungeon, so that might be another option if you don't really have any good regen gear or bolster gear. I think, you know, lifesteal might be a really good option, especially for more heavy damage dealers. So like my Mashal that I was using earlier, or if you wanted to bring in somebody like a ninja who I know can solo this and can be really effective, that might be an excellent option for you there as well. Now with Walking Tomb Drang, again, 4-turn cooldown. I think it's actually a 3-turn cooldown on the HP burn skill when he's booked. But I decided to go ahead and try him unbooked just to see if he could work, and he does. Not 100%. If he doesn't land his HP burn enough, if it takes too long for him to finish off the boss, he will die, but it can definitely work. I had to build him with a lot of resistance. Definitely don't want the debuffs to be landing on him. That's always problematic, but if you can do that, and I had him at 240 speed so he could utilize his skills again on those 4-turn cooldowns, very effective. I ended up turning off his A3 because, again, it wasn't really beneficial to us. It was really more than anything else throwing off the timing of the HP burn skill, which I need to land at exactly the same time every time. So I just brought him in unbooked. Now, obviously, if you book him, it's going to be even better, right? You can have him on a 3-turn cooldown, which means I don't have to run him at 240. I could run him at like 180 speed and still get some pretty good damage out of him. I can use stuff like Defiant Set in there to help mitigate some of the damage he's taking, but a regen set works really, really nice. So, you know, there's definitely there's a variety of approaches, I would say, as far as using somebody like him. And because he not only places HP burn, but activates that HP burn, he becomes a really effective approach to taking down the boss and doing so fairly quickly. It's not, you know, he's not going to be the greatest of options for you, right? Because the boss is taking multiple turns anyway. Those HP burns would activate naturally, generally. But I do like him as an option as an HP-based champion. I think he could be really, really good. And so this becomes an approach as far as soloing the boss that I think many of you can take and run with, really. So those are 4 different options as far as approaches. We got a couple HP burn, we had a damage dealer in there, we even had a poison champion that could be effective in there. But are these the only champions that could do this? Absolutely not. I mean, we have so many champions that are really good for this. Obviously, max HP is really effective against this boss. So bringing in somebody like a Husk would be highly recommended. With his high base HP, being an HP-based champion, it would be a lot easier to keep him alive. And all you need are a few of those max hits to be able to finish off the boss. Elenarl is absolutely fabulous for this. An unresistible A1 HP burn is really good. And both Poisons and Poison Explosion are actually effective against this boss. So that might, you know, those are things that only add to it. So she'll constantly be able to do that damage for you. Give her a regen set so she can survive, and I think you'd be in good shape. Bad Alcazar is definitely an option. If Urogram can work, Bad El can definitely work, right? And that's kind of the thing that we want to keep in mind. What are the approaches that are going to work for us? Poison's solid against this boss, but it's a little bit slow, right? It's just not as much damage effect as you are getting from things like HP burn or raw damage. So not my recommended approach to things, even though Urogram does work and effectively. I would prefer to bring in somebody that does HP burn so I can keep the time of my run to a reasonable level. In the same vein, raw damage dealers are going to be great, right? And if you have somebody like a Royal Guard or, you know, I don't know, anybody like Royal Guard, Baron, you know, any of these big damage dealing champions, they sound like they should be amazing for this. The hard part, though, is their base stats aren't going to be great. And so keeping them alive enough, making them tanky enough so that they can survive and get enough of those hits out becomes really problematic. This is why we have so many 2-man teams utilizing a Godseeker or an Elva, because they become the secondary person to help with that survivability. Now, obviously, you know, you got champions like Geomancer that are usually really good against dungeons, but because his max HP gets reduced basically to nothing, that's not my recommended choice if I had to pick one. So not my favorite option for this boss, unfortunately, but there are so many other champions out there. At the very basics, if you have champions that can reliably land HP burn, you can build them up with enough HP and defense and speed to be able to land it regularly and heal up with regen gear. That's all you need to be able to solo this boss. Stage 7. It's actually very, very simple. Obviously, the gear is the hard part, and not everybody has that. So I say it's simple, as in it's simple in concept and in execution. But for many of you out there, you might just not have the resources to do that. What does that mean? It means you're not ready for this dungeon yet, and that's okay too, right? It's not going anywhere. And as I've said before, you don't need to ascend any of your gear to be able to do the existing content. So you don't need to worry about that whatsoever. So anyway, hopefully this was like, you know, a little bit eye-opening, maybe gives you guys some ideas as far as other champions that you could bring into this dungeon and just solo these early stages. And actually, I would love to hear, I really got a kick out of, you know, hearing people recommend different options for those early dungeon levels. I would love to hear what you guys are using. Like I said, you know, somebody mentioned actually was using a Myceliac Ornn, and I actually tried it. I couldn't get it to work. So for me, Myceliac just didn't work, so I wouldn't recommend them for you guys, but I do know some people have been solo farming with him. Ninja in lifesteal gear was one recommendation I got, and I thought that was really interesting. Again, I haven't built that. I probably won't build that. I don't really want to blow up my ninja right now, but that is an option out there as somebody that does a lot of good damage. If you can build and survive, that might be a way to go. But basically anybody that does enough damage, if you give them a way to heal, you should be in pretty good shape here to be able to do this. So hopefully this opens your eyes to some different approaches to this. I know so many of you are asking, how do I climb? And honestly, you don't need to. If you can't, don't worry about it. It's not going to be that crucial, especially early on. You can wait a little bit to find one of these champions, these teams that is more accessible to you to actually get to those higher levels. I think level 7 is going to be the place to be at right now. So, you know, hopefully this was helpful for you guys. Again, let me know if you guys have any other solo farm builds or even duo farm builds that you're using, especially for these lower stages. But I'm definitely interested to hear all the different approaches you guys are taking. But anyway, that's what we got for today. Thank you guys so much for sticking around, watching, and yeah, supporting the channel. So that's all we got. Till next we meet on the Deadwood Jedi.